Awesome. So yeah, thanks everyone for taking some time out of your morning or afternoon, wherever you may be joining in from. We are talking today about business email compromise, email security. Going to give some examples of the type of attack, the features that you might see in an attempted business email compromise incident, and some advice, techniques, training and tools, options that you can use to protect yourself and your company against that sort of attack. Um, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Trend Micro, or Michelle. Natalie have probably given you the overview of Trend Micro as a company. Obviously, we've been doing cybersecurity for over 30 years now. Very wide-ranging implementations from enterprises to medium business, small business, and over 7,000 employees now across 65 countries. So one of the biggest and longest term security companies out there, singularly focused on cybersecurity. So today's topic, what the heck is BEC? It does not rhyme. I'm sorry, I was kind of tricking you there with my headline. But BEC is business email compromise. It's a fairly unique security problem. Business email compromise is defined by the FBI as it's basically a sophisticated scam targeting businesses. Um, Initially, the focus of the bad guys was on businesses working with foreign suppliers, but of course, it can apply to any suppliers where businesses regularly perform wire transfers or remote payments of funds. Um, the schemes that the bad guys use are basically to compromise business email accounts, either from subterfuge, mimicry, or actual compromise of the accounts to trick employees, basically to conduct unauthorized fund transfers. Um, like I said, the different methods of impersonation, um, it really is fairly wide ranging, and the threat actors can potentially be using various types of email services that you might see to either mimic or impersonate usually an executive, someone with authority to request transfers of funds. So they can use free services, your typical Gmail, Hotmail, Outlook type accounts. Those, of course, they're really easy. You can create a new account with whatever name you want on there. So they'll use that to impersonate a personal account of an employee. There's localized email services. UK has Virgin Media, Mail.com in Germany. South Korea has a Naver.com. So they're basically country specific email services, again, for that sort of personal email account mimicry. And encrypted services too are pretty widely used. Proton Mail, Cryptext. It helps them to cover their tracks, right? So once the malicious activity is performed, it's more difficult to do investigations with the encrypted email services. One of the other options that they also use is a self-registered domain. So they'll actually create a domain, sometimes called a cousin domain, that mimics a company account, right? So instead of trendmicro.com, you might have trendmicr0.com. So they'll replace characters. They'll replace a D with a CL so that when it's just observed on screen with text, it actually looks like a D instead of CL, right? So they'll kind of mimic the name so it's not so obvious when you're looking at it. And one of the big advantages of a self-registered domain is that they actually have control over the administration of that domain, so they can bypass some of the sender authentication checks like SPF, DKIM, um, some of the security tools that an email gateway security might look at to authenticate that it's a valid sender domain. They actually have control over that because they've registered these domains. So that can be a tricky thing to pick up. And probably the most complicated and impactful can be stolen credentials, right? So they'll actually utilize phishing, spear phishing. They will obtain the actual login credentials of a user and use that to use their actual email account to send internal emails. And of course, that's probably the hardest to detect and the easiest one to get fooled by, because of course you're receiving an email from your coworker. You're not going to be immediately distrustful of that. So it can be really, really difficult to detect, especially just by eyeballing it for untrained, not security focused people, and even for experts. I mean, we do our own internal tests. There's, pen tests I've seen. My previous job on the customer side, we had a penetration test where the pen test company simulated a domain similar to our company domain, sent a whole bunch of emails out that had replicated our Citrix main portal page and had a link on there to submit a help ticket if it didn't work. And of course, it didn't work. So people would click on the help request and type in their credentials, and a lot of important people got their stuff harvested there. So it can be very difficult to pick out, even for trained users. So we'll talk a bit about that and how to minimize the potential impact. So you can see here it's a very lucrative business. It takes some work, so it's one of those types of attacks where they're not just spamming out hundreds of emails or thousands of emails to different users, different companies, just hoping for someone to click on something. Um, Business email compromise actually takes some work and research, and the threat actors do tend to do that. They'll look at social media, they'll look for um, contact names, contact information. They'll look for things like when an executive is speaking at a conference or traveling, because that could be an opportunity where they can simulate an issue and an emergency because they're away from the office. It it can help them in simulating that sort of emergency situation that someone might react to um, without doing the due diligence, without paying attention to what they're sending, and potentially compromise their finances there. And you can see here in 2020 alone, it was almost $2 billion that we know of that business email compromise attacks actually achieved and stole. So a number of different techniques they can use. CEO fraud, like I said, mimicking an executive to send info to obtain financial transfers. Supplier swindle, that's a important one to be aware of. Sometimes the attackers aren't necessarily looking to compromise your own company, but they're using you as a staging point where they can potentially compromise your customers or your suppliers, right? So they'll use you as a compromise point where they can simulate your employees to your customers to try and um, steal their money, basically redirect their funds. So that's a big potential hit to your own reputation, right? So that's an important one to protect against. And of course, the account compromise I mentioned. Phishing, spear phishing, trying to get the credentials so they can actually perform their activities as that user, as opposed to just a mimicry, makes it a lot harder to detect. And another reason why it is difficult to detect, unlike your typical malware, ransomware, phishing type attacks, there's actually no URL link, there's no file attachment for security products to scan. So it makes it that much more difficult to detect. It's just strictly social engineering. It's fraudulent activity. It's convincing people to do something that they shouldn't be doing directly through a conversation. So let's see here. You can see over the last few months, this goes back from July, August, there was a huge spike in our detections from our various customers. So a lot of activity that we've noticed really expanded over the summer. I think a lot of that can be factored into a lot of employees are working from home. So there's not that in-person interaction in the office. So it can actually make it easier for this type of attack to succeed. Because again, it relies on employees making hasty decisions. It's an urgency. It's tricking people to do something, and when they're away from the rest of the employees, they might not have the resources available to ask, to confirm, to do part of a normal process that might prevent or give them that second thought to avoid um, falling prey to these attacks. So yeah, we saw a very large increase into August and maintained through September. A bit of a drop off in October, but not too much. It's still significantly higher than we were seeing earlier in the year. For an example here, this is just a very simple example of a CEO fraud where an attacker is mimicking an executive email asking for an urgent transfer of funds um, via email, right? So it's a high level executive spoofed, like I said, often when they're traveling, and that sort of information is really easy to find on social media, unfortunately. LinkedIn has information on conferences and who the speakers are and that sort of thing. A lot of people on their other social media, Facebook and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, don't necessarily have their privacy settings really locked down, so you can generally find a fair bit of public information online that the attackers can leverage to potentially enhance the chance of success with their attacks. The target recipients are generally they're on the finance side. It's generally someone that has the capability and responsibility to transfer money. Um, so they're looking for the finance team, accounts payable. Someone that actually does have the authority to make transfers of money. For the most part, it's not exclusively that. One of the potential theft targets can also just be data, right? There was a number of incidents over the past years where a business email compromise attacker asked for tax information of employees or of customers. So they're looking for specific tax forms. And then they can use that customer data or employee data, and they can actually just go and sell that on the dark web, because that can be valuable for other attackers and the other bad guys. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a financial transaction um, in and of itself that they're trying to do. That is the most common, but you know, data is valuable these days, and that's another thing to be aware of. They might just be looking for information that they can resell. So it's not always financial involved targets. Um, the email subject, the content typically does have a sense of urgency. It's asking for a transfer. Can you send me this? Can you send me this? Can you send this over here? Just something to try and have fast action, so they don't have time to think about it. Um, is generally the process. And of course, like I mentioned, there's no payload on the email. So there's no link, there's no attachment, there's nothing for those typical security products to latch onto and make a detection of a standard sort of email threat, malware, or phishing site. So it's a lot harder to pick up, and not every vendor has tools that have that capability. This is an example from a real world attack. There was a company had a business email compromise attempt, and they were working with a company called Agari Cyber Intelligence Division. And what Agari was able to do was insert themselves in the process, and it started with mimicking of CFO email, I believe. And what they asked for, and this is one of the characteristics, this is actually a known criminal group that's been dubbed Ancient Tortoise. I have no idea who comes up with these names, but hey, that's what they call it. And one of the characteristics of these guys as attackers is they actually don't try for the immediate fund transfer. They're not looking for a direct fund transfer from the companies they're trying to compromise. They actually do look for information. So in this case, they sent an email purportedly from the CFO asking for an aging report, or it's a list of accounts receivable, so a list of customers, outstanding invoices, and the timing of that with the customer contact information. So obviously very valuable information, stuff that you do want to protect. But what Agari was able to do was to step in here, and they sent them through a fake list, and basically we're able to observe the process and the activity that these bad guys, the Ancient Tortoise folks, were using in their attacks. So um, there was a whole process where they received the report. Within a couple days, they had contacted all of the fake suppliers that they had provided. What they did was they actually were able to take the standard invoice templates that the company used and just convert them, and that's what the screenshot is. You can see on the right, they actually just converted them with new banking information. So they contacted all these outstanding accounts saying, "Hey, we need you to pay up. Your accounts are due, and oh, by the way, we've changed our banking, so send them into to this bank account instead now." And they followed up. They actually sent these customers an email from the same mimicked CFO account saying, "Hey, we're collecting in on all these accounts. We would appreciate your payment as soon as possible." And then they followed up with an email containing the altered invoice here. So it all looks very official. Again, it's not hard to be tricked by some of these guys when they're experienced, when they know what they're doing, when they're able to craft really tricky, convincing content. Right? It can be really hard. Um, Another example here, stolen conversation. That's a lot easier to do, more common when you do have something like compromised credentials, right? So the bad guys can actually log in as the user, and they can insert themselves into an email thread and start replying, um, so that, again, it can be really difficult to pick up, to detect by the customers and the people that they start interacting with. They're especially dangerous here with compromised credentials, and unfortunately quite effective. Um, Again, the threat actors are willing to take the time to do the research. They understand who they're talking to. They know what they're trying to do and accomplish. So their campaigns are really specifically tailored to the targets that they're trying to compromise. Um, and again, with the amount of information out there, it makes it unfortunately a little easier on the bad guys. So um, I'll take a quick pause here. I actually don't have my chat up, so I can't see, but Aram and team, are there any questions as far as the business email compromise tactics, techniques, anything that I've talked about? Any questions in the chat?
No questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to address with Gabriel?
And I've got more. I'm not done. So
No. No, we can go ahead.
awesome.
Thanks.
All right, no worries. So, you know, that's all doom and gloom, all the bad stuff that's out there. But to switch it around, what can you guys do about it? So how can you protect your environments? How can you make it easier on your employees? How can you prevent these types of attacks from being successful? There's a few things that we really would recommend, and they kind of fall under two main categories. Your last line of defense is always your end users, and especially with this type of attack where it is based on social engineering, it's based on tricking people into doing things that they shouldn't do. Um, that end user knowledge and awareness of the potential of this sort of activity is really critical in that. So you want to provide um, continuous education and for everyone, because it really can potentially impact everyone from the CEO all the way down to just the typical employees day to day. Because again, it does tend to be focused more on the financial staff, but not always. It can just be information that they're trying to steal, and almost everyone has access to something as far as company information. So everyone from the CEO all the way down really needs to be made aware of the techniques, the types of scams that the bad guys are typically using, and the procedures and the policies, what to do if they do suspect this sort of activity is going on. So you really need to focus on having a defined response that people are aware of, that they know what to do when they see something that they suspect might be malicious activity. Um, some of the things for them to be aware of when they receive an email, if they're not sure. Um, a lot of times you'll see specific characteristics of the intention of the email. So highlights that we note in a lot of these attacks. There's obviously, in a lot of cases, there's some sort of financial implication, some request for a fund transfer. You need to send me something. It doesn't always involve large amounts. There's business email compromise attacks that are targeted just at getting iTunes gift cards, right? It's someone imitating a coworker saying, "Hey, I need to buy some gift cards for my niece. It's her birthday, and I can't get access into this thing. Can you just I'll pay you right back. Can you just buy me a gift card and send it over to me, and I'll reimburse you later," right? It can be really small dollar amounts, but for the bad guys, when they're doing it consistently, it all adds up. So, and again, it's hard to track. It can be, you know, not difficult sometimes to convince the end users, because hey, it's my buddy from over in accounting. I'm just going to do him a favor, and people don't really think of it, right? Especially when it's a compromised account and it actually looks like it's coming from their actual email address. It's tough. So yeah, so some sort of financial implication, a specific call to action, right? They want a response. A lot of times they'll send an initial email and they'll wait for someone to respond to it, which kind of means the hook's in, right? You believe that I'm who I'm pretending to be, and so then I'm going to take the next step from there. So some sort of response that they're asking for, and then of course a measure of urgency. They don't want you to take time to think about it. They want you to just get it done. This is really important. I need it done right away. Can you just do it? Just do it. Don't think it. No, I need it now, right? So that sense of urgency really kind of, it's an attempt to sort of short circuit that thought process where you might think, maybe this isn't a good thing. Maybe I should look into this a bit more, right? So those are some of the characteristics that we see as fairly common in these types of emails. If you dive deeper, I mean, for some people they're more technical. You might want to look at um, specifics on the email header, right? A lot of times, especially when you have the attackers using some form of mimicry, when they're using free services or self-registered domains, those can be more obvious if you actually look at the email header information, right? So you can have the email being routed through insecure services, not what you'd typically expect from a corporate mail flow. Um, a forged domain, right? For the self-registered domain, they might be replacing letters, like I was talking about. Replace an L with an uppercase I or the number 1. So it looks like your domain, but it's not quite exact. And that's something that you can potentially see, not just in the actual from field, but in the headers, you can get some more info on that. It might be uh, more obvious because the header information can also be forged, so it's um, you know it can be difficult. But sometimes they miss things. There's information that you can pick up on here. And you can see also that there's a difference in the from address and the reply to address. That's a very common technique where the from display has been forged so that that information that displays just viewing the email on its own looks legit, but the reply to address is to a free service, or again, like I was saying, the different types of services that the attackers can use to create these accounts. So a few different things that you can pick up by diving a little deeper into the technical pieces of an email. So those are kind of just characteristics um, to look at. One of the other things I'd mention as far as potential um, defense against this is to make sure there's a process in place for um, you know dispersing sensitive information, for making financial transactions of a certain amount. Have a policy and process in place where it takes some extra verification, right? So a second employee sign off, get a second set of eyes on it. Can help. A verification by another communication channel. So don't just rely on that email chain. Pick up the phone and call and say, hey, just wanted to confirm that you need this transfer, and don't use the contact info from the email. Use the actual contact book, address book info, the known phone number. Have a voice verification, some other channel rather than just the email, and don't just hit reply to the email within your email tool, because of course, as you can see here, that can be forged, mimicked, altered, so it doesn't necessarily go to where you're expecting it to go. Um, so yeah, that's a few as far as just information process that can be really helpful in avoiding these, and training. There's a lot of services that can simulate email attack campaigns. Trend Micro happens to have one that is free called Fish Insight. So you can actually run a simulated phishing attack. You get all your stats and data as your employees click through and type in their username and password. So you can follow up with additional training on the employees that need it. So that's very useful. There's tons of different tools out there that can help you with this. And that kind of leads into the second category of tools. So, you know, we believe at Trend Micro that the more you can take the challenge of detecting these out of your end users' hands, the better. Absolutely, they're the last line of defense. They need to be educated. They need to be aware. They need to do their part in keeping your company and your environment secure. But we feel it's the responsibility of IT, of security, to provide the tools in the process, in the email service, that really minimize the potential impact to the end user. We want to take that concern off of their plate. We want to make sure that these things get caught, they don't get delivered, so you don't have to worry about the employees just making a mistake. And again, it can be really easy. It can be just a lapse of thought, a lapse of judgment. It just click, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and by then it's too late, right? So you want to take that burden off the end users with the technology and the tools that you can put into place. So of course, there's multiple options for your email security system. Something I want to make sure that I emphasize is that a lot lately there's a transition from on-premise systems into cloud email, and you want to make sure that you transition your security along with the service. Um, I found it was a lot more common with on-premise systems where it was fairly comprehensive. The term layered security is really critical here, and especially with email, because you have your mailbox, your actual mail system, and then you have a gateway. And normally, again, with on-premise, a lot of customers would utilize both those layers in their email security. Sometimes not so much when they transition to cloud. They'll either, there's built-in good enough security on some level of the cloud services, and it's maybe just not looked into enough or not evaluated as far as the capabilities and protection that you're getting. So I would recommend absolutely multi-layer. You want a gateway that's doing your spam protection, that's doing your sender analysis, your authentication, blocking all that stuff from even reaching the mailbox that you can. But it's also important to have a layer of security on the mailbox, on the service itself. It really fills up some gaps because, especially with a kind of attack like business email compromise, where a lot of it is internal communication, um, having that security layer on the email service itself can be really pretty critical. It depending on the tools, of course, Trend Micro has a really good one. We have some capabilities like right style analysis, where it can analyze important users, executives, finance, look at how they craft and create their emails, and actually trigger if an email is sent that is outside of that normal style of writing. So again, not relying on a link or an attachment or anything obviously malicious, just that extra protection on potential social engineering type stuff of a compromised account, where it's actually that user's email that's sending it, but it's not the user themselves. And we can flag that by our AI engine and the specific detection engine we have for that. Um, that sort of thing can be really important. There's extra layers you can add on. I don't know if you're all familiar with XDR. Um, Extended detection and response. You can bring in your email activity and telemetry. Um, it can enable things like risk analysis of your users, so you can tie in your Azure Active Directory, your Office 365 information for login info. Again, that can really help with identifying compromised accounts and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different layers of security tools, the email security, the extra detection and response, that again can be super useful, super effective in picking up these advanced sort of email threats. And, self-serving, of course, I do have sales in my job title. Third-party analysts do rank Trend Micro Tools very highly in our enterprise email security. So we are very well regarded. We have been for a long time. We've been doing email security over 20 years, so we do hopefully know what we're doing. So yeah, that is my deck. I will pop back over here and see if anyone does have any questions from all that. How are we looking in the chat?
Don't have any questions in the chat group, but I'm sure if anybody has any questions, you can follow up with Michelle, Natalie, or I after this call. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for taking your time to go over this. Thank you, everyone, for joining. As mentioned again, if you guys do want to maybe go through a trial or a demo, just let us know. If you need any extra information, Michelle, Natalie, and I can assist you with that. And if you had any other questions, please let us know. We're here to help and address any of the concerns you guys have.
Yeah, and feel free to connect in with me on LinkedIn. Any questions that do come up down the road, I'm more than happy to interact and chat about it.